Conquest is best achieved when you don't have to physically fight. There are numerous subjects I've covered over the years which I consider essential understanding if one is to truly educate themselves on politics. This video is one such subject, and one I fear that far too many people don't even grasp on a basic level. It's for this reason that we now live in a world where people are totally incapable of seeing propaganda right in front of their eyes, as they're gradually put into a cage of their own making. I'm talking about what's often referred to as a Psyop, or psychological operation, and only by understanding this can people begin to see past the sophisticated propaganda we're being subjected to on a daily basis, especially in a post-CV19 world. So let's delve into the art of psychological warfare to begin to pierce the false reality that's become our prison. An ancient tactic associated with legendary Chinese general Sun Tzu is the art of fighting without fighting. In The Art of War, a book compiling the military tactics of this general, it states, quote, "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting," unquote. Setting aside how it's entirely possible that Sun Tzu never existed, this is a demonstrably effective tactic that underpins virtually every form of warfare we see today. The trouble is that most people think warfare is only fought in the physical arena of some sort of battlefield involving machines and weapons of war like tanks, guns and rockets, or historical versions like swords, spears and catapults. In actual fact, as we can see with Sun Tzu's quote, warfare is not restricted to physical conflict at all and can be far more psychological. A more obvious example of this is the fear of battle. If you can make your enemies so terrified that either they surrender or flee before battle begins, or become too afraid to fight at their best, this can result in a victory that significantly reduces risks to your own resources or forces. It's this psychological arena of warfare that too few people understand, but even this dimension is still quite obvious and well known by most people. It's when we get to yet more subtle forms of psychological warfare that we really start to see how insidious this can be and how only the most conscious person will be able to see through it.
The theory of subversion goes all the way back 2,500 years ago. The first human being who formulated the tactics of subversion was a Chinese philosopher by the name of Sun Tzu. 2,500 years BC. He was an advisor for several imperial courts in ancient China. And he said, after long meditation, that to implement state policy in a warlike manner, it's the most counterproductive, barbaric, and inefficient to fight on a battlefield. You know that war is continuation of state policy, right? So if you want successfully to implement your state policy and you start fighting, this is the most idiotic way to do it. The highest art of warfare is not to fight at all, but to subvert anything of value in the country of your enemy, until such time that the perception of reality of your enemy is screwed up to such an extent that he does not perceive you as an enemy, and that your system, your civilization, and your ambitions look to your enemy as an alternative, if not desirable, then at least feasible.
Once we're open to this other possibility of warfare, we can then start dissecting what many people call psychological operations, or Psyop for short. A Psyop is designed to psychologically manipulate the enemy, though the target can be so ambiguous that it's difficult to call them an enemy in the conventional sense of the word. An enemy is usually a person who wishes you harm on some level, But all too often, an enemy is merely someone that gets in the way of those coveting power and fortune, and is manipulated into submission without their full knowledge. As this video continues, it should be easier to see that, in this day and age, the enemy is actually the masses, manipulated by corrupt elites that see themselves as entitled to dominate the public from on high. This is difficult for some people to grasp because they say they have rights to protect them or they can vote in a democracy. But none of these things matter when you can be psychologically manipulated through perhaps the biggest form of manipulation there is: fear. Psyops come in three forms, each one being more sophisticated and secretive than the last. The first one is called a white psyop. This is attributable to a source that acknowledges the propaganda openly, which tends to be true and factual rather than false or fake. A white psyop can therefore be something as simple as a news report that provides clear and accurate information, or some sort of broadcast behind enemy lines which is clearly attributed to a source and tends to be based on accurate information. Next comes a grey psyop, which might not necessarily be attributed to the true source, like an activist or non-profit group covertly funded and supported by the government. Today, there are extensive examples of this taking place, wherein certain activist groups are consulted by government departments, like Hope Not Hate in the UK or the Southern Poverty Law Centre in the United States. This ambiguity allows these propaganda arms to operate in full view of the public, but still provides enough plausible deniability for the original source, therefore hiding the true objective, whatever this might be. In the case of non-profit or activist organizations, this gives the illusion of grassroots mobilization of people within local communities, or rising national sentiment. But in reality, this is something often referred to as astroturfing because it's actually an orchestrated campaign from people with a great deal of money, power and influence in society. Finally, we have a black psyop, which is totally denied by the original source. In fact, the source might be attributed to the enemy itself, thus giving the impression that they're involved in an atrocity that had nothing to do with them, like a terrorist attack or, dare I say it, a mass shooting. The kind of propaganda associated with a black psyop is often called black propaganda, as opposed to white or grey propaganda with the other two forms I've addressed. One should become aware of these propaganda techniques and start questioning official narratives. It often doesn't take much digging to start seeing gaping holes in official narratives we're given. Why these holes exist is often dismissed due to classified info or flat-out gaslighting of reality. Whatever the case, black propaganda is occasionally documented in history, like the Gleiwitz incident that Nazis used as the precedent to invade Poland. Another example is attempts to blame Bashar al-Assad for chemical weapon attacks against rebels in Syria, thus using this as a justification for ongoing military intervention in the Middle East. Things get much more difficult to prove once we move beyond examples like this, because we've invariably found ourselves in a world where governments are actively working to subvert their own populations, as we move towards a new international order that's slowly but surely taking away all our fundamental liberties. This becomes practically impossible to point out to people that aren't capable of seeing through official narratives, because they don't understand how propaganda works. Frankly, everything we're exposed to on a daily basis by the state is a form of propaganda, but not all propaganda is necessarily subversive or bad. Some propaganda can be genuinely helpful, like providing important facts that help raise morale or knowledge. But the reason propaganda has such a bad reputation nowadays is because it's often designed to demoralize and misinform, and even mainstream media rarely provides anything other than some form of grey propaganda for this purpose, while providing plausible deniability to the forces working to subvert our societies. Perhaps nothing demonstrates this more in recent history than the CV19 scam, which allowed shadow agencies and unelected figures to bombard the public with so much psyop propaganda that most people have become utterly demoralized and confused. As time goes on, many are certainly waking up to the fact that CV19 is nowhere near as dangerous as we were initially led to believe, generally only affecting people with an average age of around 70 or younger people with existing comorbidities. However, this doesn't mean most people are prepared to accept that elected politicians like Boris Johnson or Donald Trump aren't the ones making the decisions anymore, and they're so busy trying to avoid being blamed for going along with the CV19 scam that they'll even convince themselves that lockdowns were the right thing to do. These days, most warfare isn't even fought on a battlefield. Why would it be when the people at the top have consolidated so much power at this point that it's not in their interests to blow up resources and infrastructure? The only thing standing in the way of their total control is our minds. This is Rocking Mystery, over and out. If you liked this video, please consider buying my book, Pulling Back the Curtain, Feminism, Socialism and the Nature of Freedom, a philosophical journey that questions everything we think we know. Links for purchasing this book can be found in the description for this video and at rockingphilosophy.com.